What's up, fish heads? Tony Baber here with another episode of Co-Angler Talk. First thing we're going to cover is the tournament weekend. I want to give you a detailed look at everything from the initial registration to tournament day to ultimately you hoisting the trophy over your head. The second thing that I want to cover is the widely debated and discussed topic of etiquette, specifically as it applies to you as a co-angler, so that you can better understand what is expected of you and hopefully you can avoid any uncomfortable situations while you're out there on the water. So let's get to it. Welcome back. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell so that you can stay in touch with all my latest content. Now, in episode 1, we talked about a general overview of getting into tournament fishing and what your expectations should be. I'll put the link up there so that you can go back and watch it if you haven't seen it yet. But in this episode, I wanted to do a detailed look at specifically the FLW Phoenix Boats Bass Fishing League and how that whole process works from registration to the end of the tournament. The first thing you'll have to do to register is get a membership. You'll have to get a competitor membership through the FLW fishing website. It costs about $75 and it covers you for the whole year so that you can enter in tournaments. Anything from the FLW series to the BFLs. Now, once you have the competitor membership, then you can register for your first tournament. Whether you're doing one or you're doing all 5, that kind of goes back to episode 1 and kind of how I discussed my approach for that whole thing. Obviously recommend you do all 5, but let's just say you're doing one tournament. Now the way it works is once you've paid for that tournament, which is $100 right now, you are put on a list. And basically there's co-anglers and there's boaters, whichever, you guys get linked together as people sign up for the tournament. Now, one way you can guarantee your entry is to actually link with a boater. So if you have a friend that fishes in the division, or if you make friends or acquaintances with somebody that needs a link, you kind of hook up with each other that way and you sign up and register for the tournament linked together. What this does is it guarantees your entry in. Nobody can kick you out. You're both guaranteed to be fishing as a boater or a co-angler. Doesn't mean you're going to be fishing together. It just means that you're both going to make it and fish in the tournament. Because if you're not linked together, the way it goes is by priority entry. So if you've signed up for all 5 tournaments, you have a higher priority to get into the tournament than somebody who hasn't. If you signed up earlier than somebody else, then you have higher priority to get into the tournament and make it than somebody who hasn't. Now this is under the assumption that there's not enough boaters to cover all the co-anglers, vice versa. If there's not enough co-anglers to cover all the boaters, then you could get switched over to a co-angler as a boater, which I've seen actually done before. So something to keep in mind. Like I said, I recommend getting a link if you can manage to get one, because it's going to help you just release some of the stress of getting into it. Now, once you do get into the tournament, typically you'll receive an email that gives you confirmation that you are in that tournament, which at that point pretty much guarantees or promises that you're going to be in the tournament and you're not going to get kicked out of it, unless a bunch of people on the boater side for whatever reason have to back out of the tournament. So once you're confirmed, now it's just a matter of waiting till the tournament rolls around. Now I recommend you register as early as possible. Registration typically opens up the first week of December, first or second week of December, depending, and from that point it goes all the way up until I believe it's the day of the tournament, or even the priority entry is earlier, a couple days earlier if I remember correctly. But once you're confirmed in the tournament, now the tournament rolls around. Now I recommend you get a hotel ahead of time if you're not staying with somebody, or if you are staying with somebody, make sure you book your reservations early enough so that you're not having to worry about staying somewhere real far away. Because what happens is some of these tournaments are held in somewhat remote locations. There may not be a lot of hotels to choose from, and if you don't get in there early, you'll get stuck having to travel 30-40 minutes to maybe get into the tournament site. Now, once you have that taken care of, you show up on Friday. If you're not there to practice, or if you don't have somebody that you're practicing with, you want to be there, or at least I recommend you be there on Friday. So Friday evening, what happens is, if it's your first tournament, you are required to either show up at the meeting, or Saturday morning you have to sign a waiver. So there's a waiver that has to be signed for the very first tournament that you fish. Once you've signed that waiver for the year, then you're good for the rest of the year. It doesn't matter. You don't need to sign another one. So that's why I definitely recommend that you show up for the first meeting so that you can get that out of the way on Friday evening before. That way you're not kind of messing around with it Saturday morning, the day of the tournament, which, you know, can happen. They give you up until the blast off to actually make sure you sign that waiver. So if for some reason you can't make it down there Friday, don't feel like you can't do it. It just makes it easier and less stressful if you can sign that waiver for your first tournament the night before. Now typically the tournaments meetings, the angler meetings, are held somewhere between 6:30, 7 o'clock p.m. Like I said, Friday nights. They typically run for hour, hour and a half, maybe up to 2 hours. Just kind of depends on how the flow of things goes and the weather and stuff like that. Is all that can kind of play into it a little bit. But what they do at the meetings is they give you a general overview of the rules and regulations and things like that as far as the tournament go. But they also tell you about off limits, which can be extremely important, because you don't want to get stuck somewhere where you're fishing somewhere you're not supposed to be fishing, you get disqualified. But then they also give you the limits, like the size limits. So like with Dale Hollow, there's a slot limit there for the smallmouth. Things like that are really important. You want to make sure that you pay special attention to, make a note of it, whatever you have to do to make sure that you remember that information, but you want to make sure that you retain that so that you can ensure that not only you, but also your partner, your boater that you're with, don't break any of the rules or, you know, basically infringe on anything to where you can get disqualified. The last thing that kind of happens at the meeting is at the very end of it, that's when they give you your boat pairing, your boater pairing. So they typically send out a text message that has all the information. It'll have your boater name, his cell phone number or contact number. It'll also have your flight number and your blast off time. So typically there's 4 or 5 flights. There can be more depending on the number of entries, but typically there's 5 flights. They're spaced out about 15 minutes apart as far as weigh-in goes. So if you're in the first flight, you might weigh in at 3, second flight would be 3:15, so on and so forth. So all that information will be on your text message. Very important to make sure you keep track of that information specifically. Now once you get that information and the meeting's kind of done, the MC's done talking and going over the rules and things like that, call your boaters immediately. Call them as quick as you can, send them a text if you can. Hopefully you have cell service. I know sometimes cell service isn't necessarily an option at some of these places, and if that's the case, just in case you don't get the text message, they do have all the information down on paper so that you can reach out to one of the officials with the tournament series and get that information for who your boater is so that you can try to make contact there. Now most of the time these guys will be at the tournament meeting so that you can meet face to face. So if you can't get a hold of them or whatever, a lot of times you can sit there and kind of call out your boat number until you find each other and partner up that way. Now that's kind of the other side of why I say you should go to the angler meeting. So being at the meeting gives you a chance to meet face to face with your boater and kind of start to establish that rapport with them. You can go over topics such as how you're fishing, you know, where you want to meet, what time you want to meet, and things like that. And I'll go into some of the etiquette stuff here a little bit later this video, so I'm not going to go into too much detail with that. But that's kind of that initial setup and where you can kind of get everything organized for the next day and the next morning. So now you're coming into the morning of. So Saturday morning, my experience typically has been, I've met my guys as early as 5 a.m. and as late as 6:15 a.m. Typically blast off is somewhere between 6:30 and 7 depending on first light and how they have it scheduled at and where you're at, Central Time, Eastern Time, that kind of thing. But like I said, typically a lot of times I've had to be there around 5:30 to 6 is usually a good time. Now the check-in, because all the boats have to go through a check-in, that opens up an hour before blast off. So if you're at 7, the check-in opens at 6 a.m. That's where you can get your boat number tag and a little float that they give you that you use when you go to check in at the end of the day. And that's also where they check your live wells to make sure that they're working and check the kill switch for safety reasons to make sure that everything's working the way it should be on the boat. So now that you've done that, you go through the entire fishing day, you do your thing, you come back in. Now sometimes they'll have what they call a trailered weigh-in where you actually pull the boat out of the water, then you get your fish and go to the weigh-in. Some of them will let you tie off and actually, or require you even, to tie off and bring your fish from the water, so to speak. So once you get your fish, I would always go get the bags, bring them back if we both had fish. Once you get your fish in the bags, then you go up to the weigh-in station. Now there's where you need to sign the paperwork, kind of initialing, saying that both your guys' catches are legitimate, they're legal, they're within the rules, things like that. There wasn't anything that went on that needs to be discussed or taken up with the officials. Like, that would be the time to do that if there was a situation or an instance where it needed to happen. Now once you get your weigh-in, they give you a slip that you hold on to for verification purposes if they want it. And then you basically take your fish, take them back down to the release point, they release them back into the water, and then you're done. Now usually you have a pretty good idea if you've done pretty good, if you got a good weight. They do display the top 10 or top 20 maybe even positions as far as the tournament goes, where you're at weight wise, so you can see it on there. Depending on how many people actually register, they pay out up to 40 positions if you have at least 200 boats in the tournament. If you're in the top 40, then you'll probably be getting a check. Now it's up to you. You can stay and get the check, or you can go ahead and go home. They will mail the checks to you. If you happen to get a trophy, which is typically handed out, I believe, to the top 5 positions, I think they will hold on to it and give it to you at the next tournament, or they can mail it to you. They probably make some sort of arrangements. I've never had the issue. I've always stayed. If I get a check, I usually just stay, wait until they print them off, hand them out. And then of course if you get the trophy, then you stay for that whole thing. So that kind of covers the whole tournament aspect as far as a more detailed look at the way it goes step by step. I know it's kind of quick, down and dirty, but hopefully that gives you a good idea of what to expect as far as the actual tournament process from Friday to Saturday. The second half of this video, which is a widely discussed and kind of deliberated conversation, and that's the etiquette. Specifically as it applies to the co-angler, because there's all kinds of unwritten rules and things like that, and some of it's kind of hard to find information on, at least when I got into it. Some of the information's out there and there's wide variety of opinions and things like that, so I will say that all this is kind of my general opinion. Obviously go about it how you feel comfortable or what you feel like is appropriate. This is just kind of a general overview, general idea, and kind of my opinion from my experiences. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was going to the meeting. So I kind of covered it before, but I feel like it's really important to go to the meeting because it helps establish that rapport with your boater. But then it also gives you the opportunity to kind of find out what you're going to be doing. Now that being said, don't prod and pry or expect the boater to give you a ton of information. Some guys will be better about it than others. Some guys are a little bit more protective and guarded of their quote-unquote secrets because they just don't want to share it. And they're afraid that maybe you'll go tell somebody if you're there with somebody, you know, you're traveling or whatever, a little conspiracy theory, if you will, that goes on amongst the boaters and things like that. So don't, you know, try to be respectful of that and understand where they're coming from and understand the competitive side of it. You know, don't look for them for all the answers, but try to get an idea. You know, feel free to ask them, hey, how are we going to be fishing? Where are we going to be fishing? You know, what kind of techniques are we doing? That kind of thing. Don't, you know, it's case-by-case basis as to how much detail they'll actually go into. So like I said, don't expect them to give away everything and say, I'm using this jig, this size, this color, fishing in this depth of water. It's not going to be like that typically. I've had maybe one guy in 4 years that went into that kind of detail on what we were doing, and it was because he was locked in on a very specific pattern that he had a lot of confidence in. They will typically tell you, like, hey, I've been catching them on an Alabama rig. Sometimes they'll tell you that, or they'll say we'll be deep dive crankbaiting, or we'll be throwing, you know, pitching and flipping up shallow, things like that. I mean, that's the kind of information that's useful to you, so it gives you a better idea of what to tie on and what to expect as far as where you're going to be fishing. Another thing I'll say is, and some of these guys will ask this at the meeting, hey, do you have a life jacket? That kind of thing. I always brought my own life jacket. The first tournament I ever competed in, I didn't have one, but from there on I always brought my own life jacket just because I knew that it fit me right and I didn't have to worry about whether or not they had an extra one. 99% of the guys probably bring an extra life jacket just in case, because it's not necessarily required that co-anglers have their own life jacket. I just recommend it for your own comfort and your own safety, and then also you're not relying on them for any more than you have to. Another thing I will recommend is offer to buy ice. Say, hey, do you want me to buy a bag of ice? Do you want me to get drinks? You know, is there anything like that that you need me to bring? Especially in the summer months, because a lot of these guys want extra ice to help, you know, cool down the fish in the live wells, to keep the water cool, or just keep drinks cool. Now, most often I've had boaters offer, hey, I've got drinks in there, help yourself, do whatever. Some of them have even gone as far as, hey, I've got an extra sandwich for you if you want it. I just never expected it. I personally would always bring a couple drinks with me, you know, whatever I felt was appropriate for the day. Obviously, you want to make sure you stay hydrated. And I would bring a couple snacks with me as well. So as I was editing the video, I found out that the last bit of the whole etiquette conversation got cut off somehow. But I covered a couple of very important things that I wanted to make sure that you guys did get the chance to hear and kind of get my opinions on. The first of which would be actually on the water and fishing, and kind of how the rules are for that. So by the rule book, it technically speaks basically that as long as you don't infringe on the other person's ability to fish, then anything is pretty much open. Now, by the kind of unwritten rule, a lot of guys like to think of it as the middle of the boat's kind of the cutoff period, like you're not supposed to cast beyond that middle of the boat. What I recommend is kind of stay true to that. You don't have to keep it like straight to the point, like, hey, don't ever cast towards the front of the boat. I would always try to be respectful and give them the front part of the boat, especially depending on how we were fishing. So if you're fishing low and slow, so to speak, like pitching and flipping, it's not as important that you're casting up to the front, so to speak, because you're not moving real fast down the water. Now, if you're doing something like power fishing, that's obviously a lot different, because you're going a lot faster, you know, Mach 3 down the bank or whatever. So it might make it a little bit tougher if you're not casting towards the front a little bit, because it's hard to fish behind you if you're moving forward real fast, which I understand that. So you kind of have to use a little bit of judgment, a little bit of common sense, and kind of let the boater, I don't want to say dictate, but kind of feel them out and see how they kind of react or what they say. Because I've had boaters actually tell me, hey, you can throw towards the front, I don't care, you know, just don't cross my line, whatever. And, you know, when you hear that, that's great. It makes it a lot easier, it makes it a lot more comfortable for both of you when they're kind of upfront about it. But I've also had guys where I've casted kind of forward a little bit and they've kind of given me that look over their shoulder like, hey, what are you doing? Without actually saying anything. So kind of use your judgment, feel it out. Obviously, don't nerf yourself to the point where you're not able to compete. You know, like, don't feel obligated to cast only behind you. Look for those targets. Pay attention to how they're fishing and go after the stuff that they're missing and things like that. I mean, we can get more into the strategy of it in a later episode, but I just kind of wanted to cover that side of it. The way that I always approached it was kind of gave it that middle of the boat, kind of invisible line, and just try to give them enough space to be able to do what they got to do while not impinging on my ability to compete and fish as far as that goes. The last thing I wanted to cover with you is the gas money. So there's all kinds of different opinions on gas money. Some people say, you know, give 20 bucks, 30 bucks, 50 bucks, $100, half your winnings if you win, that kind of thing. My personal opinion is basically anywhere from $20 to $50 is typically what I would give. My kind of starting point usually was $30. Obviously, use a little bit of common sense, use a little bit of courtesy. If you're fishing somewhere like a 9,000 acre lake that can be covered easily on, you know, minimal gas, there's no need to give, you know, $80 in gas money, because you basically just paid for 3 trips on that lake. Whereas if you're somewhere like Lake Cumberland that's 60 miles long and you're making a long run, I wouldn't think that it would be appropriate to give them something like $20, because you're spending a lot more gas, you're traveling a lot more on that lake. So it's kind of use your best judgment, do whatever you're comfortable with doing. I don't feel that it's necessary that you have to give half your winnings if you win. If you want to give more, then by all means, you know, do whatever you feel is appropriate. The biggest thing is just the polite way to go about it and making sure that you're offering that money to them, because, you know, it is part of the deal. You know, it is kind of expected. It's not written in the rules anywhere that you have to offer money or you have to give money. So, I mean, if you don't feel like it's appropriate or necessary, then by all means, that's your prerogative, and I'm not going to judge you for that. I would just always approach it from the standpoint of typically giving $30 to $40 to at least chip in and help out. You know, I didn't mind. It wasn't a big deal to me. I understand that there's obviously a lot involved with that whole thing. Now, I can speak for myself. When I move up to the front of the boat this coming year and fish as a boater, I will probably more than likely not take any money from my co-anglers, because I've already invested all that money into it. I've already decided that I wanted to do it and spend that gas money and stuff like that, so I don't feel like I need that $30 or $40 or whatever it is that they're offering to make a big difference in my weekend. So yes, I would appreciate it. Yes, it would be, you know, it's a polite thing to offer, but me personally, I probably will just turn it down and not take that gas money, because if anything else, it makes you feel good as a co-angler when they're like, no, don't worry about it, just, you know, I'm not worried about it, you don't worry about it, that kind of thing. I always felt good about it because I just felt like it was a nice, courteous thing of them to do, because obviously they don't have to turn that money down. So approach it however you feel fit. Like I said, my rule of thumb was somewhere between $20 and $50. It just kind of depended on where we were at, how we were fishing, and that kind of thing. But yeah, so just kind of take it that way. But I wanted to cover that topic just because it is a widely debated topic as well, as far as the gas money. So just to give you guys a heads up on it and kind of give you an idea of how I would approach the situation. But that's all I've got for you on this episode. Hopefully you've learned a lot. Hopefully you got a lot out of it, and you have a better understanding of kind of the whole process of the whole tournaments, as well as some of the etiquette and maybe unwritten rules and things like that, as far as with your boaters and how that whole thing works. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, obviously leave them down below. I will respond as quickly as I can. You can always email them to me at tbaberfishing@yahoo.com. Also, you can direct message me on any of my social media, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, any of that stuff, and I will respond to you as quick as I can. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, or anything that you'd like to see me cover maybe in future videos coming up, I think I've got about 2 or 3 more episodes of the co-angler stuff coming up. Talk about some of the tips and tactics and strategies that I've used, and just different things as far as that'll help you hopefully be more successful out on the water in your first season, or even if this is a more veteran kind of thing and you've done it for a few years, maybe you can pick up something or approach something a little differently than you have in the past. So until next time, guys, good luck and good fishing.